welcome back to Animation Dissection, the podcast about animation and dissecting said animation. I am Neeksy, here of course with Zorak.
I'm an anime.
We all are. It's a never-ending cycle. So, today we are going to be talking about the amazing world of Gumball, but first, let's talk about the animation news, but also before that, just want to say, hey, sorry it's been a while between episodes. We've been a little bit busy scheduling, so they might not be coming in every week. We're going to try, but, you know.
I mean, that's always how it's always been. We try,
Oh,
we
yeah.
don't always succeed. Sometimes we overbook too much, and then sometimes real life, conspires against us, as has happened, the last couple of weeks.
Yes.
So it goes.
Yep, I'm speaking in the middle of nowhere at the moment. I brought my microphone with me anyway, so we'll see if my connection can hold out today. So, animation news. I actually don't really have too much in terms of news this time, other than a couple recommendations. So, in the new anime season, besides One Punch Man, which is amazingly well animated. I mean, also the original comic is amazingly well drawn.
Is it weird that I'm not actually that interested in watching the anime?
Well, because the manga is already good enough.
I mean, the manga's fucking incredible. I know it's weird approaching it from this angle because I've made the counter argument in the past of they're both good, and it's not like I'm being oh they're gonna ruin it. I realize it's a different thing. It's kind of just more like I don't actually feel that much of a desire to say, man, I gotta see how this is animated, because it's the most animated comic in history is probably One Punch Man.
Yeah, I mean, basically, some of them are practically already storyboards or keyframes.
Yeah.
Like, he's actually practically animated sequences in some parts of the comic, down to just shot by shot for certain action things. I mean, yeah, it's kind of cool to see it actually kind of pulled off if the studio's good, which so far it seems pretty good. But at the same time, I go, you know what? The comic is actually good enough. I don't need to watch both versions of it, because one is already so close to being the other.
I mean, and the artist we're referring to here is Yusuke Murata, who previously did Eye Shield 21, which looked very nice.
Well, it was
leave it there.
It was a sports manga before they started getting kind of interesting. Right now we're in this kind of crazy renaissance of decent sports anime and mangas.
I mean, it was a shonen series. Shonen sports series almost are always pretty dull unless just because it's a very hot-blooded thing, and it had a different writer for it, and that writer also had some interesting ideas on how, say, black people worked.
Well, yeah. So, Eye Shield 21 was Japan's interpretation of American football.
Yeah, which is an interesting concept, and it's had some interesting stuff in it. But regardless, the main appeal always was the art, and then this One Punch Man is now him animating, or not animating, drawing a previously made webcomic by a webcomicer called One, and now it's getting an anime. I highly recommend checking out the comic, the manga. It's really good. The anime sounds pretty good, so maybe check that out too. But definitely check out the manga. You can actually buy it on Amazon now, and I think that's totally something you should probably do, because it's
support it.
It's incredible.
And the only other series I want to recommend is a strange one, and also because I kind of have a weird connection to it, is Osomatsu-san, otherwise known as Mr. Osomatsu on Crunchyroll. And Osomatsu-kun is a comic from the 1960s, and it's kind of been around for a long time. It's about these sextuplets, and it's always been kind of satirical in a certain way, and kind of had this very open architecture where characters' roles kind of change from episode to episode. They would have episodes on TV where the entire world was taken over by aliens who released these highly addictive watermelons to the public. So people would eat these watermelons and become addicted, and it showed how society became just obsessed with watermelons. The whole thing is like that. And so now this remake, something 40 years later, the first episode just came out, and it has it's meta aware of the fact that it's hey, we're restarting the anime. Look, we're on TV right now. And they're oh shit, but we're a Showa era thing. No one understands these dumb jokes anymore. And so they desperately try to make what they think is modern anime, and it turns into a parody of every single thing at the same time of what anime is like right now. Like it is absolutely insane and perfect. Like they even do they'll change the art style for the intrusions of the other series. So like there's an Attack on Titan reference, and suddenly the art style of the character that comes in looks like from the anime version of Attack on Titan, and the whole thing's going to be really crazy. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that Yuasa hasn't worked on it, because from what the rest of the episodes look like, it feels like it would be in his like wheelhouse for sure. So I
I mean, you
definitely
also did work on. I think you got to start on Crayon
Crayon
Shinchan.
Shinchan, yeah. I mean, but this the
Yeah.
way they're animating this one, when you look at the other episodes, it looks like he would actually kind of enjoy doing something for it. Like it feels very much like him. So I'm kind of impressed by it already, but also the fact that I grew up as a kid reading and watching some of these Osamatsu things. So like it's kind of funny seeing this now redone, and it's not just a reboot. Like instead of being like kids, they're now adults in this version. So they're kind of rebooting it, but with the idea that time has passed them. So I thought that was an interesting thing.
Cool.
Other than that, indie games, big thing. Please play Undertale. I know it's not an animation thing, but really, really good. And I just recently played it, and like, holy shit. But in actual animation-based one, Zorak was telling me, and also I've seen a trailer for it. Indivisible,
Yes,
which
from
is it's currently being kickstarted, right?
it's actually an Indiegogo.
Indiegogo, right?
Being done by Lab Zero Games that previously did Skullgirls. And if you're not
Yes.
familiar with either Skullgirls or have actually seen the trailer for Indivisible, they actually have a fully playable prototype that you can actually check out on their Indiegogo. It's a very it's probably some of the most animated games, and like certainly the most animation that we've seen like in a fighting game, short of that newest Guilty Gear.
Or the Persona 4 game, which
Right. Well,
was
I don't
yeah,
know. I think this is actually more animated than the Persona 4 game by a lot than
probably.
Skullgirls
But I mean,
is.
that was still they were both hand drawn.
Sure. Yeah, but give it a look. Like just from
Yeah,
a pure like aesthetic standpoint, it's worth looking at. They have a prototype there that's playable and it's pretty neat. Um,
just the amount of animation for not just the main character, but like all of the enemies and the attacks and everything was pretty impressive.
yeah, and the artist slash animator that they have on it, I can't remember what her actual name is. I think it's her the name she goes by is like Kinuko. Her style is really interesting and great. So just give it a
Yeah,
look.
it
Uh,
also doesn't seem to have the same issues I would say I had with Skullgirls, but
yeah, Skullgirls has some problematic elements. I think it's still
yeah.
really interesting,
Oh,
but
it's
yeah,
still interesting. I mean,
definitely.
it's well executed.
Yep.
That's not the problem. Of course, I have and others have. I mean, your mileage may vary depending
Sure.
on whether or not you feel like Skullgirls was problematic or not. But in terms of just quality, it was quite good. I
Yeah,
mean,
you can
like
enjoy
it was
something that's
ambitious, and they
problematic that
yeah,
don't need to stop you necessarily.
yeah, exactly. So artistically, it was very interesting, and
Mhm.
in certain, I mean, most of it was very well executed. So
Yeah.
and just having that ambition is kind of nice. Like one of the things I kind of found really funny was with all the updating of technology and a lot of the emphasis going towards CG being in games. I go, well, with that update of technology, you can actually use really good traditional drawings now in games, whereas previously, processing wise, you couldn't do that kind of little miniature movie clips that you'd be animating traditionally.
Hmm.
So like it would be kind of cool to see a lot more games using that technological ability that you can actually use that traditional style as
Yep.
well. So it's kind of nice seeing that coming up, and I'm seeing a lot of smaller studios getting involved in these independent games projects. So like if you're like an animation studio of maybe 10, 15 people, or sometimes even less, or if you're there's like studios that are not really even a physical studio, they're just a collection of people like around the world and things like that.
Hmm.
I think there's one called Studio Yota or something like that, which is an American-based one that is pretty much just like a collection of people around the country. You can actually team up with indie developers and be like, hey, we'll provide the animation for your cutscenes or your intro or even the assets inside your game. So like that's becoming a new emerging like field to get into. If like let's say your studio can't possibly have the facilities to do a feature film or a TV series, you can still have the facilities to work in games sometimes.
One thing that's this random reminded me of is that there was a Gama Sutra, which is a game industry website. A pixel artist did a blog on there talking about them renouncing doing pixelated art actually because the
I remember
reaction
reading that. Yes.
to some of their art and was kind of like showed the disconnect people really have towards this style, and they think it's like, oh, retro is bad, or like the sense like they
Well, they think
pixelated.
it's like a trendy thing that people are doing just because
Yep.
that's just what indie game. I mean, and yes, we are seeing that a lot. I mean, again, even with Undertale, which I really liked, it's retro, but that one, it depends. Some games it feels unnecessary to have them have that retro style
Yeah.
versus others where it fits the intent of the game, the style, the storytelling. Like if there's a thoughtful reason behind it, I'm all for using that retro style. I think some of the critics out there might have a point in that some games are definitely doing the pixel thing just because that's just what's kind of in at the moment, or trading on nostalgia. But I think they're also too quick to accuse people of that without really considering it.
Yep. I mean, the example they're using in this particular blog, I think, which is by Blake Reynolds, is talking about the fact, like, comparing, like, Street Fighter 4, which was all, like, 3D models, versus, I believe, Street Fighter 3, which was, in fact, sprite-based. And talking about the animation between the two, people say with, like, Street Fighter 4, it's, improved and better because it's using 3D models. Or that's clearly a better art, but it's not necessarily the case because you can't do certain things with the animations as easily as you can by doing sprite, or rather, sprites can be a lot more expressive
They
as
can. I
opposed
mean,
to 3D
basically, what
models.
happens is the transition from traditional to CG has been kind of like the transition between the quiet and sound era when it comes to films. There is that growing pains thing, and I think what it is that CG, it takes a lot more effort to make it expressive and to break the model expressively than it is just to draw a new frame that kind of breaks the model.
Hmm.
So it was much easier for them to do like a sprite who would suddenly kind of expressively break model to look different and really in CG, it's a lot harder, or at least at the onset, it was much harder to do so. I mean, they've been
Hmm.
improving that, but it still requires a lot of effort. I think what happens is people think better because, well, yes, you can now view this character from any angle, and the animation is inherently smoother because it's being computer calculated movement. Whereas
Right.
in traditional, you're seeing it as, well, the only frames that exist are the amount of frames that are drawn. And many of these studios, these are not, drawn 30 FPS. Like there's not one drawing for every frame. So it doesn't look as smooth, but you often get kind of exaggerated expressions. You get sometimes the unintentional errors that kind of give something life. And that's something I think a lot of people have difficulty with in that transition period. I also just think that people are applying the same rubric to everything. Like they're judging CG by traditional standards, or they're judging traditional standards by CG standards. Like you can't really, it's unfair to compare them with the same value.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's the thing. Overall, though, I think what is really kind of needing to be more emphasized or taught or understood, what have you, is the idea of intelligent production design. It's the idea of, okay, this is the project I want to do. What's the style, and also what's the workflow that best expresses it? Like what matches it best? And also in terms of budget and things like that. I think a lot of people rely on kind of like a formula when it comes to designing a production, and it doesn't always fit, but they're going to try to make it fit anyway. So you get these things that feel very tonally inappropriate, or tonally dissonant in some way. Like, a lot of people go like, well, look at how badly animated Family Guy is, or look how stiff it is. And I go, well, imagine if Family Guy was animated better. Would that really actually benefit the show in any way? Like it's script talky based show. Like, so having, really advanced cinematics or smooth animation doesn't really add anything to it. In fact, it would actually kind of distract from the jokes that the writers are trying to get to. So Family
When
Guy
there's no
is
dynamism
is
involved, they
boring
actually
and
benefit.
stiff, but stylistically appropriate to the content, if that makes sense. This is not me praising the show that I don't like the aesthetic and I don't like the show that much, but it is stylistically appropriate for the content. And trying to make something much more ambitious than that visually would, oddly enough, I think, work against it somehow.
I mean, yeah, there's not enough dynamism actually involved in Family Guy that and higher quality animation or breaking the model would actually benefit them. I mean,
Yes.
The Simpsons in the past, I don't know about these days.
In the
has
past,
certainly
I
done
thought it was very,
I mean,
yeah,
the Simpsons has always been a lot more dynamic in
it
general
used
than
to be.
Family
These
Guy.
days, it's
It at
gotten
least
a
used to be.
lot more stiff over time.
Sure.
Character
I mean,
models
in
don't
more
break anymore in the way, so
sure.
you'll never get a Homer heart attack style animation in the modern day. They just don't. They've gotten very, very model stiff in a lot of ways.
It's lost a lot of ironically, it's lost a lot of the comical aspects that kind of allow you to actually do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Family Guy, oddly enough, is slightly more grounded in terms of how it actually approaches things, not necessarily from an emotional level, but from a model's standpoint, from how they kind of approach, the stories and narratives they kind of approach, and how the actual things are actually being presented
It's
is
very
quote
matter of
unquote
fact.
matter of fact. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That's a good way of putting it. Actually, better than grounded. Having the dynamic things of them breaking animation wouldn't really
Well, the
do
thing
all that
is they're
much.
using the sitcom camera style. Like so
Absolutely.
in television there is single camera and multi-camera. Single camera would be something that is often more cinematic. I mean it's kind of counterintuitive, you'd think, but something like a 30 Rock or a Parks and Recreation is considered a single camera sitcom. So a traditional sitcom like Cheers, for example, is a three-camera sitcom where it's a stage and the angles you never really do a lot of reverse shots. And characters are presented in a very theatrical style. When I say theatrical, I mean live action stage acting rather than a movie cinematic style. So Family Guy originally being a parody of sitcoms and Simpsons also being a parody of sitcoms were relatively much more compositionally, at least, much more like a three-camera sitcom. Simpsons, I think, had moments where they would break with that, and in fact, they would do a lot of really great movie references, not by naming the movie or talking about the movie, but they would use shot compositions from those movies. So I think Simpsons kind of broke that a bit. Overall, Family Guy in general is, well, yes, we will do these action sequences in general, but they're still somewhat constrained by using that three-camera sitcom model. They don't use a lot of reverse shots. It's very much like you're watching something on a stage. And that's actually really great for your budget. And if you're doing a series that is mostly verbal gags and talking, that's actually a really effective way of doing that. And you can get it done and it doesn't cost as much money. Like you wouldn't need to do an action anime style, production design for a show that's mostly talky. So it's about stylistic appropriateness, and I think that's kind of this idea that is kind of, I think, lost on a lot of people, or it's not being taught well, where everyone thinks that everything has to be this visually ambitious thing at all times, as opposed to like, well, no, wait, hold on, what's the aspect of the show that we want to showcase, and what's the best way to not just do that artistically, but can we accomplish that within our budget and the talent pool that we have? So it's kind of understanding and working with those limitations and intelligently. What was I was talking on Twitter with LaShawn Thomas for a little bit about it. He has a pilot that he has made. He's the guy that worked on what's it called, Black Dynamite, that animated series, which was like visually really impressive. Like that show,
Yeah.
I thought did some of the best visuals within that type of budget that you could actually accomplish. Like it was a beautiful looking show. And now he did a Kickstarter campaign that was successful to do a animated pilot of a series he created called Cannon Busters, and it's being animated in Japan actually with help from Thomas Romain and all these other great people at I think it's Satellite. So we'll see what happens with that. But I mean, he's getting that stuff out there, but he's very intelligent on how he uses his production design. Like he's able to accomplish a lot with honestly probably a very small budget. I mean, Adult Swim shows don't get really huge budgets, but he still made it look on par with some of the stuff you'd see coming out of Japan, if not more.
How much of that in terms of low budget was him just working for free though?
I don't know, but even then, like one person can't make that difference.
Sure, fair.
So that's where I think is that's where that production design, not just artistically, but how do you structure your production in mechanics and who does what goes where, what are the steps you're doing, you know? I think that is something that you have to change depending on also the style you want. Like to
Sure.
accomplish a certain style, these are the steps and this is the best workflow that will do it. So I think it's something that needs to be studied more and looked at, or at least I do, you know.
Yep.
But I think it's like people complain about the American animation industry all the time. They go, well, everything looks the same. I go, well, it's not for the lack of talent. It's a system, you know. Like if you get a show on TV, it's often managed by people who go, well, this is how you run a show. These are the steps we have. So that's why things are going to kind of look the same. It's efficient, it's under budget, and it does decent enough, but it's not going to be adventurous in the same way as someone who can come in and go, no, wait, I know that's how you guys do things, but here's a system and workflow that I use to achieve this result. There's very few of that. People who are able to come in from the outside with a new way of doing things because it's risky. So,
It's a very risk-averse industry.
yes. So is almost every
So is
industry.
every other industry, actually. Think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing I actually just thought about while we were having this conversation. One last recommendation thing I want to mention.
Mm-hmm.
Given that this is October, October's kind of spooky. I want to point out that the master of Japanese horror, Junji Ito, has a new manga that you can pre-order on Amazon right now. It is called Junji Ito's Cat Diary.
Oh my God! So they've actually translated into English officially.
Yep.
Yes!
You can buy it for $9.
Oh my God! I suggest it. So two people recommending. 2 out of 2.
Yes, and it is fantastic.
Well,
Give it
here's
a
the
shot.
other Junji Ito news. He was also involved in the canceled Silent Hills project. So fuck
bad.
you, Konami.
Yeah, another thing on the pile. I will
Ah,
just say also, just related to just Junji Ito having stuff available in the U.S. The hardcovers for his manga, like Gyo and Uzumaki, are very good. They're
yes.
very well made, very well. They're just good things to own.
And also, if you are a Pokemon fan, Nintendo actually hired him to do spooky versions of some of the Ghost Pokemon.
Yeah,
So
I've
you can
seen
look
some of
up
that stuff
those. So that was
previously.
really fun.
I think he did some of that stuff last year as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're doing it this year, but I remember last year. So, but
Oh
it's
yeah,
still up somewhere, and so you can check those out. It's kind
yeah,
of fun.
it's
Um,
cool.
so go Nintendo on that one. So let's go into the amazing world of Gumball then. So Gumball started in 2011 and is still running. I think it's up to it's in its 4th season, and each season though consists about 40 episodes each. So it's quite a bit of content per season. It is actually a U.S. and British co-production, mostly housed in Europe. So it's produced by Cartoon Network Studio Europe, and is also animated by Boulder Media Limited, which is a studio in Ireland. The series was created by Ben Bokele. I don't have too much info on his background other than that he had done a little bit of animation directing and was hired on to Studio Europe around the time when Nickelodeon and I think another network had pulled out a lot of their European development processes. And he had actually created this series by combining a lot of these characters and concepts from various commercials and putting them into one reality. And I think that was kind of a neat idea. I mean,
Mhm.
here's the basic big thing about Gumball is stylistically this show is, I guess I would call it a style mash. It's a photorealistic world in certain ways. I mean, it's a cartoonified world, like it's not, but at the
I mean,
same time,
it's not literal photos.
they're
It's just
actually yeah.
very good CG with some really great effects on top of it.
And also some of them are photos, but they're manipulations.
Yes,
So like if you go online, I think I showed you this video
I believe you
where
did. Yeah.
they showed someone just this is how here's the storyboard, and then here's how we made that background, and it was just, I mean, it was amazing. I mean, a lot of it was in the cases that I saw, it was real life photos and stock photos being edited and transformed and drawn on top of, and all sorts of crazy stuff to make these.
Right.
The show does make lots of use of CG as well. I mean, all the moving backgrounds, the camera pans, vehicles, and things like that. They're done really well.
Hmm.
Like you don't notice or you don't mind the fact that it's in this kind of 2D characters interacting with it. Like it normally that kind of thing causes a weird dissonance, but it all works so well. I mean, it also helps that some of the characters are CG as well, or some of the characters are even animated in such a way to make them feel like stop motion. So, like, their texturing is real life textures applied to an animation model with some staggered frames and movement to give it that stop motion feel. And then they also have CG characters and then 2D characters. Like, just that's all that attention to detail is so amazing to me. Writing wise, I find it also pretty funny. I can't remember which episodes I had you watch. I
I
had you watch
believe
one called The Money, which I
you did
really
have me
liked.
watch that one, which was probably the favorite of the episodes I've actually watched. It was just because of how meta it kind of went in terms of the humor.
The show
Definitely
does
was
that
a
quite a bit. Like it's very
yeah.
much self-aware. There are episodes based around like dealing with the background characters and their limitations because of how they're designed. Like they can't move right or things like that. Or there was an episode about, oh, I'm just this background character that wasn't very interesting, and the narrative universe of that world tried to eliminate them because
Hmm.
they were just too boring.
That one was kind of funny just because of all the references to dumb stuff from like the 80s and 90s as well.
Oh yeah, and here's the great thing is whenever they do these parodies, they're so well observed.
Hmm.
Like they get just the amount of detail. So like in one of the reasons I wanted you to watch the Money episode is not just because I think it was like the apex of meta, but also because you like watching a lot of 80s and 90s commercials, and the
Yep.
very ending is a parody of it, and it's so correct. Like they got that kind of Vaseline lens that was used back then, the warmer tones and things like that. Like it looks stylistically like a McDonald's commercial or something like that from the 80s or 90s.
Hmm.
Like they nail that so well. Or like when they have there's a character named Sarah in it who is this kind of, I guess you would just call her a weeb. Like she's this anime obsessed character, draws her own comics, but like when they look at her drawings, they literally look like something a 13 or 14-year-old girl who has just, seen anime or manga for the first time has drawn. Like they got that kind of aesthetic down pat. And I just love all those little details that they put in. Like you can even read if you ever pause certain scenes and you read like warning signs, they'll write things into them that you wouldn't notice. Like there's this one where it's like, why are you reading this? This is just like in the background for what? I don't know, 12 seconds and it's at 13, 2-point font. Like how are you reading this? And they put that in the background.
That's pretty good.
I just love the attention to detail the show has put into it. I mean, it's just, I think visually the whole series is absolutely stunning.
I
And
mean, visually, it's probably some of the best animation on television. I don't know how much of
it's
that is
limited at the same time though because it is
sure.
puppeted animation. So yes, these are 2D characters, but they aren't animated entirely traditionally. Like what's cool is that they will break the model much more often than a lot of other puppeted shows. So let's say, compared to a total drama series, total drama island or whatever the fuck
Ugh,
iteration they're doing with it,
let's not
they
talk
don't
about
really
those.
break the models with those types of shows very much. With this one, for just pure expressivity, they will kind of redraw or kind of make a really crazy looking face for it. But overall, yes, they are puppets. So that it's not, it's not pure 2D animation in a traditionalist sense. But I think it functions very well for what it is. I mean, also, I don't know how you could accomplish, doing this show with, just the amount of creativity and talent and time it has to do to execute this thing. Adding a traditional 2D style would just, I think it would kill them.
Right. It's weird. I wonder with with this in terms of like it looks really expensive, but I'm guessing that it's not actually as expensive as it looks. I wonder if it is just that they've got a very good production process that they've kind of got like they got their steps so down pat for this that they can kind of go through it without it being insane
Well, I
because it
think that's
looks like
exactly I think what I was talking about earlier.
yeah,
Like I
exactly.
think they just know what they're doing. they know how to get the results they want with the resources they have. And here's the other thing is you'll notice that they don't really use like a whole bunch of new locations all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So like they can reuse their assets pretty effectively without having to really do that much extra effort. Like, yes, they'll have them go to new locations fairly often, but there's a lot of really solid mainstays that they can rely on, which saves them a good amount of time. You know, like they're in that school fairly often, or they're at the Watterson's home fairly often.
Yep.
So that I think that helps them in a certain way. But in general, I think they just have their production system just down pat. And I think they also, you know, as they keep making the series, they're building up more and more resources to go back to and use. So like here's the great thing about doing that puppeted animation style is, let's say you do come up with a great expression. Well, that expression is now a part of that character's library of expressions. So like you can always call back. So every time you make something new, it's now something that you can just call upon when you need it again. So I think that's a really smart way of doing it. So like that's why in this case I'm really not that bothered by the fact that all the, you know, most of the main characters are a kind of variety of puppeted animation, because I'm normally not a fan of it, you know, except when it's appropriate, of course. So I'm trying to remember. We mostly just kind of watched a lot of episodes from random seasons. So
Yeah, I mean, I watched the ones you pointed to me, and I also just picked random episodes. Honestly, I'd be hard pressed to actually pull out a specific episode off the top of my head of the ones I watch, just because there's a lot of range and there's a lot of them.
yeah,
And I've caught some, of course, some in the past here and there.
yeah.
Um,
Well, let's go with the ones that you've watched then, because I've watched so many of them. um, well, the one I remember, the one I linked to you was the so-called Life of Claire.
sure.
Um, and I kind of liked that one a lot because of just how genre savvy it was, and the meta joke in it was kind of interesting to me, because like up until that point, you really didn't see students of different grades. You just had Gumball's class pretty much occupying that entire school, and the realization is like, wait, there are others. There's other people. And suddenly having them appear into reality, and then they make a great callback to the joke where Anais is being annoying to Gumball, and so he kind of tries to forget about her and erase her from his mind in the same way that he had ignored everybody else. I thought that
I,
was good.
I like that he outright admits that they're just side characters. They don't actually matter. This
Yes.
both in his internal worldview and also in the practical sense of the series. That, you know, there's side characters that weren't even worth like showing up and being animated.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And that whole episode just I thought was a really good thing. It was like just like I know you have your own life, but you just have to let them do what they want. You have to let the narrative play out, okay, guys? Like, or you know, Claire, like I know, like, just don't stop them. Don't get in their way. Just give them what they want.
Yeah, and just, it went also they went also a bunch of really weird like Dawson's Creek style like tropes with it.
Well, this
You
thing
know,
was a parody of something called My So-Called Life.
oh,
So like,
I ain't familiar
so
with that source material.
yeah. Well, I mean, but well, My So-Called Life is basically similar to a Dawson's Creek. Like, I don't think I didn't watch that show,
I didn't watch
but
that either, but
yeah, but oddly enough, you can recognize these genre conventions.
wait,
You know, like
it's
if
teen
you were aware
drama.
of the WB broadcasting network anytime from the 90s to the early 2000s,
Yep.
you saw one of these shows.
It's where the teen dramas don't exist
They kind
Probably
of
for the
don't.
best, but I
Kind
just
of
think
not-
about
yeah.
it like,
I mean, we've
oh,
kind of moved on from that as the just the in thing. You know, it's a product of
oh.
its era. Well, she herself looks like a character from the 90s. Like she looks like she's a grunge style mopey teen,
Yeah.
which you don't really see on TV in the same way, or at least not as much in the, you know, not stylistically, you know, dressed or behaving the same way as main characters anymore. So overall, it's a genre parody, but the whole thing is it's Gumball trying to break down that genre to make this person happy, because the genre will not allow that character to be happy. So therefore, Gumball and Darwin are going to make that person happy by destroying the genre in which she lives. And like up to and including a I mean, and he admits it's a nonsensically happy ending where like the dad just gets like it's like what about my dad's job? Well, just give him a job at the Rainbow Factory. Who gives a shit? We're a cartoon. Like it doesn't have to be a real job. which I thought that was great. I mean, they show his face just completely manic in a new way as he's trying to shove like this happiness into this ending.
Yeah.
It's
Like
like everyone's issues are solved. I did it. Yeah, and, like slams the he does the like the touchdown dance at the end. It was I thought that was a really effective one. I really like my favorite episodes are the ones where there is that kind of level of self-awareness, but it's also integrated into the show's universe.
Yeah, I mean, the show rides a very fine line between the fact that it is often very meta, both not necessarily meta unto itself, but in terms of like the narrative convention and like animation and whatnot. And it also risks veering deeply into going into the territory of like the sort of monkey cheese type stuff. It doesn't go too often in that direction. In fact,
Yeah,
it seems like
I think it has it restrains itself. It has weirdness, but you accept the weirdness, and there's also a logic to it. I think
yeah,
that's
but
the thing. That's the thing that keeps it from being monkey cheese. I
sure,
think, or as many people have labeled that style of humor, is because as strange and as fucked up as it is, there is an internal logic between going A to B to C. You know, it's weird, it's strange. You wouldn't necessarily think that way, but there is some kind of logic connecting it, and it's not just, well, here's a random thing that happened.
sure. I mean, it rides that line very,
Very, very
very
clear,
narrowly, though. I mean, it
narrowly.
stays on that line and doesn't veer off into, the bad direction of that sort of thing. But it is
Yeah,
definitely riding that line. I'm just thinking for the fact, for example, on the Money episode where like it's the musical number that just starts for no apparent reason. Like yeah, it's kind of funny, but at the same
yeah.
time, it's kind
Well,
of
but it's
also
also a parody of something.
sure.
It's like it's a satire, but the thing is, it feels appropriate because the character of Gumball is being unrealistically idealistic in that episode.
All of a sudden out of nowhere, yes.
Yeah, and even the characters comment on it. It's like, oh, this is a phase he's going through, like, and they make a reference to like how he goes through these, phases where he suddenly has this kind of moralistic thing. But I didn't have a problem with that musical number intruding because when you have a character that does that in other media, it is often in that kind of like, well, guys, let's all get together and clean up the street. Oh, and they'll sing a song about it. Like it feels like it is borrowing from a certain genre of stage plays or musicals or older types of films where you have this ideal character singing this song about things. And they even make fun of the fact that he's singing this song is imaginate, which isn't even a word.
Mhm.
So like
It just felt a little over, like that particular scene felt a little overlong to me
oh
personally.
yeah, it went on way too long. But at the same time, I kind of think they were going for it being excruciating because the other characters find it just as annoying. But then again, just because of the intent doesn't mean it succeeded in that. I
Sure.
think it was I think it was a little bit overlong, but I get what they were trying to do by making it long. It was just short of getting to the that nice golden area where something goes on long enough that it becomes funny again. I kind of I call that principle the sideshow Bob and the Rakes principle, where you do something that's kind of repetitive, but then you do it enough times where it becomes silly and then funny.
Yeah, it moves.
Then it
It
gets
basically
boring,
moves out
but
of
then
being funny into kind
at,
of dumb, but then back into funny again. Like that's the
yes,
perfect thing.
exactly like that. And I think they needed to either not. I think they just quit either too soon or they did it too late. Like
Mhm.
they didn't time that one sequence. But that ending sequence though, as their world as the budget of the show essentially breaks apart.
Yeah, that was really, really good.
That was, I think, technically amazing. Like it's just and I liked how so Darwin starts looking like he's drawn in crayon, and then if you look at the storyboards, he is also still drawn in like really poor crayon, while the other characters are also drawn. So they maintain his unique shittiness all the way through this whole sequence, and then eventually it turns into like left hand scribbles on post-it notes.
Yeah.
And then when they're pleading with Gumball, he just has this expression you can't even read. They're like, Gumball, 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 are you there? Like, he looks like they can't tell if he's thinking or if his animation is stopped. I thought that was a great one. That season in general, like the most recent season in general, has been very meta. The episode I don't know if you watched it, but there's one about American comic books.
I've not seen that one.
Okay, because that one just came out this week, and it has a whole bunch of jokes about how like the American comic book style. It's like, oh, I learned how to draw them by this book. You know how to draw comics. And you open up the book and it says first draw muscles, and then the next page is draw more muscles. And they had the whole thing about like the poses that make no sense. Like the spine is twisted. It's like he broke his power ring, not his spine. You know, like, and they have like one character lifting a boulder, but the torso is almost 170 degrees turned around from the rest of the body. Like the whole thing is inked and stylized like one of those American comic books. Like it's a if you haven't
Some like
seen
some
it,
Rob
it's
Liefeld type stuff.
oh yeah, I mean it's basically filled with those types of jokes. And it's the character Sarah drawing it about Gumball, and it's really funny. At least those sequences. That's the one most recent. I think it's called The Comic. So that was a good one. What were the other ones you saw?
I'm trying to think of the ones I've saw specifically with regard to this. I mean, I've seen a bunch of random episodes in the past. I'm struggling immediately pulling out. I watched all the ones that you told me to watch, which was the other one I watched was what is that episode called? The one where with the character who's forgotten because she was that dull and
The
boring.
Void.
Yeah, the void.
Yeah, that was another one I really liked. Also, just technically, just that one, the area that they go into, that void of reality was really well done.
Hmm.
Um, well, I guess what we can get into is so visually and I think comedically, I think the show is really strong in a lot of ways. I find that I have difficulty really caring that much about the characters because I think
Yeah,
yeah they're really just vehicles for jokes. And again, this is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm actually perfectly fine with it being this way, but you have to also admit at the same time, yeah, it is a little bit shallow. So, I mean, I think it just has a different comedic voice than, if you look at a show like Steven Universe, which does have comedy but also has drama, this one has decided, well, we really don't want to go into the drama thing. We really just want it to be a comedy. And I think in order to kind of keep that going as a comedy, you kind of have to sometimes sacrifice consequences, or long-standing arcs as a way of being able to maintain a status quo to continue making these types of jokes.
see, I mean, I'm fine with it in the sense of what it's doing, but it also kind of it leaves me a bit cold in terms of the actual bit of like how much I actually care about it from a personal standpoint. Because yeah, you can use the characters just entirely as vehicles for jokes, but then it's very hard to be watching it from anything other than the standpoint of, oh, I'm gonna watch the funny thing. You don't feel like any sort of emotional connection because it's impossible for them to actually pull anything out of you because like who cares?
Well, again, there's also not a lot of good character-based humor in it.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the characters are archetypes, but often even within those archetypes are kind of inconsistent. Like Gumball often switches between being really dumb and kind of actually fairly smart. Like he's very inconsistent that way. So sometimes he'll be like unbelievably dumb, but then other times he will be the straight man in the the crazy person scenario. So like it's fairly inconsistent in that way. And beyond the archetypes, you don't really have anything specific going on. I mean, that said, I mean, again, I find it entertaining, but like there's, I feel like there's room for the show to grow in terms of doing much more character specific humor.
Can they actually go in that direction though? Like the fact that like,
Well, I think they
they've gone
kind of did a
so
little
meta
bit with
with it that
Gumball's like crushes and certain relationship things.
I'm just more
Um,
of the standpoint that they've gone.
his arrogance, I thought, was an interesting kind of thing that they explored a little bit.
I mean, the thing is though they've gone so meta with it to some degree that like
Oh, it's really hard to go back to a form of sincerity. Yeah.
I mean, once you start, poking fun at the very like, narrative, elements that compose the work, it's a bit hard to go like once you start really pushing, holes through the third wall, which they certainly have quite often, and they get really, jokey about that sort of thing and get really meta. It's just very difficult to pull back from it and go like, actually, we want to talk about these characters. Unless you're gonna somehow try to rationalize and like make the third wall a plot element, and that is a weird path to go down, and it often does not work very well for animation. They try
So
to call
yeah,
attention to the fact like we know we're animation, blah. And it's kind of like oh,
yeah. Well, again, that removes a lot of stakes to the games.
yeah,
If characters are aware of their own artifice, then you get a
Unless
whole
they
bunch of other
kill the
questions
artist
about
at the end.
motivations and things like that come up. So I think what's going to happen with this show is that they're going to have to come up with ideas that really aren't character based, which is often very difficult. Like, if I'm writing something, it's a lot easier when you have characters and you just think, well, how would they play off each other in this situation and things like that? Versus if you don't have that wellspring to go to, you have to keep on coming up with new concepts just over and over and over again.
Yep.
So, well, actually, I think the closest thing to a character study that I really liked was the one where what's his name? He's the guy that does every job in every situation. Larry.
Hmm.
There's an episode where he quits because each member of the family had over the day treated him so poorly that he just gave up, and they then saw like the entire society collapsed into this like Mad Max style thing. They even make a whole bunch of Mad Max references in it, and you get to see how even these side characters kind of how they sort of deal with this character being out of their lives.
I mean,
And I thought,
that's a good gag. I've not seen the episode, so I don't know how that
yeah,
actually works. But that seems like a good gag. But it also at the same time feels like kind of hard to be like, oh no, what will happen to the
well, no,
gang?
yeah,
Because
it's not
it's
that
clear like
emotional. It's the
the
closest thing to a character. It's a Simpson. I think it's like a Simpson style character study where they'll do episodes like that, but they don't have the emotional impact of a good Simpsons episode character
well,
study.
it's just, the joke is a good joke. The
Yes.
fact that like that society has collapsed because he was doing everything, which is a joke they've made previously. But at the same time, like it's hard to feel that invested in it from a personal standpoint, just from the standpoint of like, oh
Yes.
yes, this is so absurd. Like I get what you're going with the joke; it's funny, but you're not going to make me care very
Emotionally
much
invested.
because
Yeah.
I'm clearly here only to see where you're going with the joke. I want to see how you're going to pull this all together.
But again, at the same time, I think that maybe perhaps that emotional detachment is an asset to the show in that you can get away with a lot of kind of seemingly extreme or horrible or very strange things without having to worry about having the emotional consequences on the characters. So, like having a detachment can sometimes be an asset if it's used well, as opposed to if it's just a detachment because they don't know how to write anything good.
Sure, though
So I think the show has a certain voice of somewhat ironic detachment.
I mean,
I
sure,
think that's
but
just something inherent to it, not something that came about out of incompetence so much as they just have this acerbic style of humor, and doing something more sincere with that would end up making the characters much more disturbing doing the same activities they do. So like certain episodes where Anais is like really manipulative, and there's that episode where she hides the remote from the family, and it turns out that she was gaming them the entire time and ends on this very kind of creepy note intentionally. But like if you had to treat those characters as more human in a certain way, or having deeper emotional lives, it would actually be much more disturbing, and maybe to the point of it not really being a funny gag anymore.
yeah, though you do run the risk of having everybody so detached that everybody just becomes like a sociopath essentially.
Well,
That
yes,
you,
exactly, and that's the line that you have to do. Like that's where I say like I think it has an acerbic thing, but it never goes too far. I think one of the episodes that I thought got to the edge of that, but actually pulled it, and by getting close to the edge, oddly pulled it off well, was where Darwin becomes obsessed with keeping people safe, and he literally turns into a dictator. Like he has like the like what was it like? It looks like a Pinochet style hat and costume, and he's sitting on a throne with cameras everywhere and video monitors, and but he looks really cute on the throne. Like that one gets like, oh my god, that's actually really fucking disturbing. But it I don't know. It's kind of hard. I find it a little bit hard to put it into concrete terms. But I again, I feel that the show needs a certain level of detachment so that way it can get away with certain things. But I think it could still do better with the character writing, without also losing that slight detachment. Because I think if you go too much into character, it can become too sincere to be able to carry off certain types of satire.
yep,
If that makes any sense.
yeah, I see where you're going for, and I agree.
Yeah. So overall, I think it's definitely a show I would recommend. I mean, I'd say almost all of Cartoon Network at the moment is on fire, and so, but it's definitely worth watching. There are currently still new episodes airing. I'm not sure what the hell the schedule is. It's kind of all over the place. Usually new episodes come up on Thursdays, but not quite sure. Um, but I mean, and you'll always see these amazing. You'll see clips of it, like where it just goes into absolute madness, posted fairly often online or all over the place. It's I guess I would call it, it's a gifable show where there's just little moments in there that are just so perfect that there's that little moment thing that you can just use in lots of situations.
Yep. I mean, personally, my standpoint with this is that I think it's an incredibly interesting show to watch from a visual standpoint, and I find it very often quite funny, but at the same time, I don't actually seek it out that
Yeah.
often just
No, I
because
get what you mean. Yeah.
it's more like, oh, if it's there, like, yeah, I'll watch this. I'm not gonna turn it away or anything, and it's not like I
It's like
dislike it.
you're a passive fan rather than an active fan.
Absolutely. I feel no desire to like I gotta see every episode. I gotta see where they're going with this. But at the same time, if it's there, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with watching this. It's
Yeah.
it's
And I
funny,
think
but
I think that's what its intent kind of is. I mean, when you look at the way a lot of these network TV networks, it's not repetitive much, how these networks work is they need that kind of show in a lot of ways. Being able to show episodes out of sequence and, it's like, hey, yeah, no, I'll watch it. It's on. It's like, hey, I'll sit here and watch this. That's kind of what they're looking for with certain types of shows. Things like Steven Universe, you really can't do those episodes out of order easily.
yeah,
Like
that one you
they'll do
very
the
have to
new
see in order.
episode and they'll sell like, oh, here's the new episode, so you see the next part in the story because it's a very sequential story now. Like at first it was a little bit out of order, but has increasingly become a lot more ordered. Like you can't show an episode, last two episodes, after an episode in the first season. Like it wouldn't make any sense why that character is there or why this character is not there, et cetera, et cetera. Like a show like Gumball or a show like We Bear Bears, for example, like those types of shows are really good for these network lineups to kind of pad out. And I don't mean this in a negative way. They're all, I think they're all good shows, but they aren't the type of, they're not reservation or they're not appointment television.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, like I do actively think, or rather, I think like Adventure Time, you can actually watch it out of order pretty often. Like I think it holds up just because there is an ongoing narrative, but on the individual episodes, it tends not to matter.
Yeah. Although I think there was a couple seasons where it felt like it was getting a little bit more narrative. I mean, well, then again, they kind of undid that by undoing everything that happened in that season.
Hmm.
So that kind of was a return to norm of sorts. I don't know. It's weird.
Yep.
Like, well, Adventure Time has a narrative of sorts, but it's so slow in that regard and so languid and so small. Only small details really carry over. Like Finn's sword will change from after certain events happen, or Jake has like a family now, but they only show up like in certain
Because
episodes.
they immediately grew up and just immediately moved out.
Yep. Again, it's that whole status quo thing. It's that sitcom thing is we need to have some kind of status quo to return to. You can do small changes over times. Like, like even some of the old style sitcoms, you had an arc of some sort.
Sure.
Like, you had the Sam and Diane will they won't they thing and, things like that change over time. But you still keep some kind of status quo. Whereas a purely narrative show, you really can't keep returning to that every episode. And that makes airing it out of order really inconvenient for networks who have, especially the Cartoon Network or Nickelodeon, which have a lot of airtime to fill, and really don't want to have to kind of do that appointment style television thing with reruns. So like Gumball, Teen Titans Go, We Bear Bears, or Adventure Time, for the most part, make really good airtime fillers in that regard. Nothing against those shows, but in terms of just the way in which they are consumed is kind of different than a show like Steven Universe. Like the audience expectation is different.
Yep.
When you're sitting down to watch an episode of Steven Universe, you have a different intent than if you're watching something that's like a pure comedy.
Yeah.
Your expectations and the way you're reading it is different.
At the same time, like looking at something where Adventure Time, where the plot is very loose and like the actual like character stuff is very spread apart. Like I feel Adventure Time manages to do a lot of the wacky, goofy stuff, but also you still care about the characters enough by comparison to where Gumball, where I don't care about the characters at all. I'm not saying that they're
Yeah.
bad or unfun, but you just don't feel an emotional connection. Like this is I do feel emotional connection.
But at the same time, it feels that there were that Adventure Time, I think, has done a few times where it swung and missed, and it became very maudlin in it.
Yeah.
Because I think that emotionality, they went too far in that other direction, and it ended up feeling insincere, heartstring tugging, as opposed to something that is a organic form of emotionality, in the show itself. So again, like I think that's the danger, is because it had for so long done this kind of strange, sometimes I would say maybe even detached humor, because if something's weird, it's a bit harder to, attach to it in emotionally. I think it had played that game so much that when they did suddenly try to get emotional in a much more severe degree, it ended up coming across as maudlin or saccharine, whereas a show that had been much more emotional the whole time wouldn't have had that difficulty. But again, a show that was much more, emotionally grounded or emotionally realistic or deep would have a lot more difficulty going into strange areas.
Yep.
So it's all about that balance. So, I mean, again, I think it comes down to what the intent of the show and what the voice of the show really is, and whether or not it's able to consistently, work within it. Because otherwise, if you go too far outside that comfort zone, it ends up being very like, it feels like, a wrong note on a piano being played. It just doesn't fit. It's dissonant. And I think audiences can kind of subconsciously pick up on that.
Yep.
So, other than that, I'd recommend it. Again, I'm the same way. I think with you is that I'm a passive fan. I don't actively seek it out, but every once in a while, if someone tells me that a new episode is out that's really good, I'll try to go see it. But otherwise, I'll mostly go, oh, cool, it's on. No, I'll catch up on episodes I might have missed and things like that. So, whereas like Steven Universe, I go, oh, okay, I need to see this next episode to catch up. Let's see. Do you have anything else to say with this one?
No, I think that's about covers everything I've got to say.
Okay, cool. So, next episode, we are going to be talking about, we talked about him earlier, Masaaki Yuasa's Tatami Galaxy.
Oh, so good.
Yes, so that one is available on Hulu, correct?
I believe it's on Hulu. I believe you can watch the first few episodes as well on YouTube, and I think you can also watch it on Funimation's website. Though I think at this point that might actually just be a Hulu embed.
Hulu, yeah.
So,
I think Hulu became the delivery mechanism for a lot of Funimation's things
yeah,
now.
so I don't know. But yeah, definitely give it a watch. Do what you need to do to watch this, because
Yeah, like if you guys didn't go out and see like Ping Pong after we recommended it to you, first, what's wrong with you? Two, you can kind of make it up by watching this one.
this one is
and then go watching Ping Pong.
This one's better than Ping Pong, and Ping Pong was already really good.
Really good.
This is
yeah.
just, oh man, Tommy Galaxy might actually just be like one of my favorite animation of all time. Full stop. I'd have to run the numbers. I've been thinking about that lately, like running the numbers. Like I look at like my anime list and think like, oh, do I want to? No. I've gone this long without touching my anime list. That like try to look through all the anime that I've watched and like do the tables and like move like the reels around and think like, is this the best? Try to elevate something, but I've not gone that far. But this might be a contender. I don't know.
I think it's definitely up there. It's still, I think for me, Paranoia Agent is still my absolute top, but that's just me. So
Yeah.
That's also a really high bar. That's a high bar to clear in my mind.
I mean, that would be a good competition right there. Tatami Galaxy versus Paranoia Agent.
Yeah.
Whoever wins, we win
Yes.
also.
Everybody wins.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
the art form overall wins. So that's definitely a competition I like to see. So other than that, you can always reach us at adthepodcast@gmail.com. You can reach me on Twitter at rymagnuson.
And I'm at SA Zorak.
So do you have anything else to plug right now?
Nope.
That's it? Okay. No moonlighting for you, huh?
Nope. Been busy.
All right. Yep. Well, so are we all. I guess something that I'd like to announce for anyone who are other animators or artists out there. There is an expo coming up called the CTN Expo. It is in November in Burbank area, and it's kind of a, I don't know if it's a convention, it's more like a trade show of sorts for the animation industry at large. You have studios like Disney, Sony, Blue Sky, all the many of the major studios and even some of the smaller ones are there doing recruiting efforts. You'll see a lot of artists who have done production work in the industry. They'll have art books or even original paintings that they're selling, or even figurines, comics that they've made. It's so even if you're just a fan of that stuff, it's a great thing to go to. But if you are interested in going into the industry, it's a very handy expo to go to. So again, it's called the CTN Expo. Unfortunately, this announcement comes a little bit after the discount pricing for those tickets is over with, but hey, you can still get your passes. It's something I think is definitely worth looking into. So just wanted to put that out there for all the people who have written in or talked to me about, with questions about how to navigate the industry and things like that. I don't have all the answers to that, sadly, but that's one major place to go to find out people who do. I think last time I went, there was also representatives from the local animation union for the LA area, which was really a good resource to have, because not only do they know all the studios, they also kind of know what's going on with a lot of the studios financially and their hiring and their work practices. So, which is, I think, a really important thing to be aware of if you're in the industry, to keep yourself from being exploited. Like an Urban Outfitters situation where they're trying to ask for people to volunteer to work with them at a fulfillment center for free. So yeah, keep your eye out. So again, CTN Expo. So other than that, we will see you next time.